Hello and welcome to Optimistic Wargaming. In this video I will be going through all of the factions that can be found within Grand Alliance Death for Age of Sigmar. If you're interested in the Chaos factions, go and watch my previous video on the subject. Grand Alliance Death is made up of the undead that inhabit the mortal realms, consisting of ghosts, ghouls, vampires, skeletons, zombies and necromancers, making them the Spooky Scary Alliance. They are led by, surprise surprise, the god of death Nagash, who lore-wise is constantly angry, because despite being invited to a pantheon as the god of death, in charge of souls in the afterlife, almost all of the other gods in the pantheon keep on taking souls without his permission, and acting surprised when he got angry at them for taking away his one job. This does not mean Nagash is a nice guy, however, being cruel, vindictive, and incredibly arrogant. Though he did create necromancy, so it's not like the arrogance is without reason. Common features of all Death factions is a maximised bravery across the board, seeing as the dead can't exactly feel fear, and the ability to bring models back from the dead. Okay, starting with a bit of a contradiction here, but the Flesh Eater Court are not actually dead. These are the cannibalistic, mortal worshippers of Nagash, who have been cursed with madness. The Flesh Eater Courts believe themselves to be noble and honourable, not seeing their rags and poor living conditions as noble garb and royal quarters, with mighty steeds rather than savage beasts. After battles, they celebrate with a large feast, which you probably don't want to get an invite from. See, Bretonnia does kind of exist in Sigmar. I will always love you, sweet princess. The Flesh Eater Courts are a force that is rather restrictive in terms of models, with most of your heroes that are integral to your list being included in a box with the basic troops that they assist with, making them look very similar to the squad, whilst making you also have incomplete squads. The Flesh Eater Courts are made up of what they consider to be men-at-arms, their cavalry, and led by their noble lords who ride their mighty steeds. Gameplay-wise, the Flesh Eater Courts are incredibly aggressive, if fragile, with most of your units having high movement, for death, lots of attacks, and the ability to attack twice in a row. The fragility of the army is made up for by the factor that whilst most of your units don't have much in the way of saves, most of your units are able to regenerate wounds, and even those that can't have a way to add models back through usage of your heroes. Speaking of your heroes, they are the backbone of your force, not only providing the ability to add models to squads, but also having strong buffing abilities and high damage output. The heroes can be split into two groups, the nobles and the royalty. The nobles are the folks who add more models and buff with one flavour per troop choice. This makes it actually quite intuitive when building and playing as to what heroes to take, as if you aren't taking any of a specific unit, don't take the appropriate hero, and when deploying, make sure you keep them together. The royalty, on the other hand, can summon entire units once per game, and with the more expensive heroes being able to summon bigger and better units on top of their superior stat lines and monstrous mounts. These are also your spellcasters, able to buff your units so that their damage output increases, as well as being just that little bit more durable. On top of this, the Flesh Eater Courts have access to a rule to represent the madness of their curse. By choosing one of the 6 delusions, providing an army-wide buff, you can choose from Mighty Crusaders, a Royal Hunt, the good one, Honour, Jewels of Honour, and the bad one. Alternatively, you can choose to pick one of the sub-factions, each of which have their own specialty, including Speed, the ability to take a pure monster list, buffs to your big infantry, your noble knights, and finally, hordes of peasants, cheering on your heroes. The Legions of Nagash are the go-to undead force in Sigmar. These are the endless hordes of mindless puppets of the recent or long dead, led by necromancers, wights, and vampires. The Legions of Nagash are how the god of death ensures that he has dominion all over the mortal realms. After all, wherever there is death, the forces of Nagash can arise. In order to ensure that he has eyes everywhere, the legions can be further split into 3 forces, each led by one of his Mortarchs, Archon, Neferata, and Manfred. The legions of Nagash are a death force with the most variety in terms of models that they are able to take. Able to take pretty much anything you would expect from a horror movie. Able to take liches, vampires, bats, skeletons, zombies, and ghosts. This is partially because they're a bit of a holdover faction from Warhammer Fantasy, and as such utilise almost the entirety of the Vampire Counts faction. As a result, you can have a force that truly encapsulates the idea of an evil necromancer who has raised the dead to crush the living. Gameplay-wise, they are very generic as far as undead forces go, with the ability to resurrect nearly every unit in the book, as well as be able to bring back whole units once destroyed for a singular command point. This makes legions an extremely durable force, though it is incredibly reliant on the hero support, with your basic units not having a great stat line, with some of them being straight up terrible, and most of your resurrection options being character based. One thing that is consistent within the mortal realms, however, is an access to corpses, because grimdark. This means that at the start of the game, you can choose 4 points on the battlefield to be mass graves. Hooray! These are pivotal points in the battlefield for you, as they allow for resurrection even without your heroes, so be sure to place them carefully, preferably near objectives. Once you utilise your characters well and protect them, the legions are a force that relies on attrition warfare, with large, possibly endless hordes stubbornly holding on to objectives. So remember those 3 forces I mentioned earlier? Well, they aren't sub-factions in the way most Sigmar factions play them, though they are more similar to the Slaves to Darkness. Each of these sub-factions is based upon one of the named characters in the book, making it so you cannot include any of the other named characters unless you take the specific one first. They are the Grand Host of Nagash, who get better Morghasts and faster model resurrection, the Legion of Sacrament, who have better magic as well as the ability to resurrect enemy units when they're wiped out, sort of. The Legion of Blood, who specialise in vampires and being spooky. Sorry, Soulblight, but maybe you'll get your own book one day. And finally, the Legion of Night, who can set up a bait unit and ambush with the others. Spooky ghosts! The Nighthaunt are a collection of vengeful, tortured spirits that seek to destroy all life. These ghosts overwhelm most forces in a sea of blades and mist, gliding effortlessly through the defences of the foe, whilst their blades pass harmlessly through their incorporeal forms. This book is also really good evidence that Nagash is not nice. Seriously, if you get access to this book, just read the lore for some of these units. It is seriously messed up. The Nighthaunt are an unusual faction, in that the army has a set of rules that are common across all of their war scrolls, namely Ethereal, which allows you to ignore any and all modifiers to your save, and Fly, which allows you to ignore half of the movement and charge rules. Which begs the question why Games Workshop decided to make an army that ignores some of the core rules as a starter army. But I digress. The Nighthaunt, as a result, are extremely fast, and are able to use the terrain to their advantage to block enemy movement, whilst you have no issue at all, though sitting in cover does not benefit you directly. The Ethereal rule is your main defence in the army. This rule makes Nighthaunt quite a good counter against armies that have a large amount of high-rend, high-damage attacks, but does make you more susceptible to forces that throw out a lot more dice. In terms of your battle traits, Nighthaunt further lean into the manoeuvrability and aggression, with the entire army being able to be put into reserve, teleported to where your general is, and most importantly, the ability to fight in the charge phase should you get a high enough charge roll. Do you remember that scene in Return of the King where the ghosts are overwhelming the orcs from the ships? Yeah, it's exactly that. They also do have abilities that affect the morale. After all, a ghost can be pretty spooky, and your heroes feed off of that fear, able to regenerate wounds should the enemy flee. The Ossiarch Bonereapers are Nagash's school science project, made up using the finest bones and souls to create what he considers the ultimate warriors. Lore-wise, they are apparently what Nagash considers diplomatic envoys, in that they will only fight the enemy should they refuse their lord's generous offers. Nagash realised that not everyone wants to fight, and if he invests in the living, they produce more bones over time. Instead, Nagash asks them for a tithe in exchange for his kindness of letting them live and stay amongst the dead. He merely asks for bones of a certain quality and quantity. Should the living refuse or miss their payments, the Bonereapers are sent in to reclaim the bones, by force if necessary. The Bonereapers are an elite undead force, with almost every unit in their army having access to their own command ability and ignoring damage, which is normally restricted to your heroes. In order to utilise the amount of command abilities that you have access to, you don't receive command points as per the normal. Instead, you get 1 plus 1 for every hero, as well as the ability to generate more per unit. This makes an undead force that is more than capable of having units operate independently of the rest of the army. You also have units that are extremely potent in combat, with most of your units having exploding hits, good stat lines, and a high level of durability, making them a truly reliable force. They are also the undead army with the best ranged unit, though that isn't really saying much, with their large units having pretty decent ranged output, as well as good secondary abilities. This is not to say that their actual heroes are less useful though, with the vast majority of them being decent spellcasters, with good support abilities, and their big lord character have an insane amount of support abilities. It's time for subfactions! The Bonereapers have 6 different ones, each bringing their own unique twist. You have one that's extra spooky and gets buffed when it's charged, one that has much greater defense, which has recently received a huge nerf so it's no longer an auto-include, one that is faster and specialises in cavalry, one that gets angry when they get hurt, increasing their damage but at a lower defense, one that ignores magic, and finally, one that explodes in fiery death every time a unit is killed. And that's it. That's all the core death factions. Which one is your favourite? Thank you for listening, and I hope that this helps you decide on a faction. If you have any further questions about anything, just let me know. Until next time, stay optimistic, and most importantly, stay safe. Bye for now.